Although the main LCD is quite prominent on the console, it's only used for setup. You won't use it for any live applications and live features. Full details of each of the menus is in the user guide, and we will cover some of them in these videos, but we'll take a quick look at the things you'll find in each menu item. The Show button accesses things for the main show, including giving the show a new name, setting the global isolate filters, which we will look at later, and dealing with saving and loading shows to the USB drive and the internal flash card. Copy paste opens the copy and paste view. We'll be looking at that in a little more detail in other chapters. Security is used to set security and lock the console. Again, we'll be taking a little bit of a deeper look later on. System is where you will find all of your system parameters, including a name of the console, the word clock settings, MAC address, HiQNet, and other things that you'll need if you're putting the console on the network to use it with products like Soundcraft Visi Remote. Preferences sets up preferences for the control surface and the operation. Primarily it's things like LED brightness and lamp brightness, but also includes the direct out gain stabilizer feature on and off, and that's covered in a separate video section on the direct out gain stabilizer. Fader setup is where all the fader assignments and fader layers are configured, and that is a chapter we'll cover later. Insert lets you assign and set up the patches that you'll be using for external insert, sends and returns. Solo adjusts the operation of the solo mode, including functions like solo highlight, which is an almost unique feature on Soundcraft consoles. Oscillator manages all the oscillator and oscillator routing to the internal buses and the external patch, including the type of signal that's generating and the level. Monitors, it's options for the engineer monitor output, including mono check and monitor delay, allowing you to delay the feed to your headphones to time align it with what you're hearing off the main PA. With an input selected, the Inputs and VCA menu comes live. Here we can name the channel, set the channel isolation from the automation, define the channel as mono or stereo, change if the channel works as left-right or left-center-right panning, do the patching of the inputs and the outputs, and setting the pre-post per channel. Pre-post is a function we'll be looking at in another chapter, so we won't be covering it here. With an output selected, the Outputs and DMX menu comes available, and we see similar functions to the input: naming of the mix, the isolation, the bus to pan mixing, setting the bus pre-post, adjusting the patching. And finally is the EQ view. The EQ shows the EQ of the selected channel and bus, the high pass filter, and the band gain and frequency. There is a strong line, which is the overall EQ curve, and the finer lines are the individual band gains. Remaining on the control surface, let's take a quick look at one of the real time-saving features offered by the SI Performer called Interrogate. Interrogate lets you see and change the status of almost any audio switch on the console for any channel. Let's take a look at how this works. If you wish to see which channels, for example, have their EQ enabled, press and hold the EQ button. The select keys will light for those channels that have the EQ in. You may deselect something by pressing the select key and enable the EQ, for example, on this channel by pressing the select key. It's as simple as that. This works for functions including the compressor, the gate, the filter, phantom power, phase, left-right routing. A similar type of interrogate exists for the VCA and mute assignments. To see which channels are slaves to a VCA or mute master, press and hold the VCA setup key. The channel displays turn blue and show the number of any VCA masters to which the channel is a slave. Similarly, for the mutes, press and hold the mute key. The displays turn red and we indicate which mute masters the channel is a slave to. There are 8 VCA masters that can be assigned to any of the channel inputs and 8 mute masters that may be assigned to any inputs or any buses. Like everything on SI Performer, the concept is to keep the setup simple, quick and easy. Let's go and have a look. To make a VCA assignment, press the VCA key to enable the setup and choose the master to which you will assign slaves. Now use the select keys on the faders to add and remove slaves to any VCA group. When you're finished, turn off the VCAs. Setting up the mute masters are similar. Press the mute setup key. Choose the mute master and assign slave channels using the select keys. When you're finished, turn off the mute setup. When you're not in setup mode, these 8 keys act as the mute masters and push the key to mute the slave channels. Any channels muted by a VCA or a mute master have their on keys lit red to indicate a remote mute status. Those paying attention to the earlier chapters will notice that the faders on the console weren't always in the factory default positions. We've changed them to make the demonstrations a bit easier. So now we'll have a look at how we change the fader setup and assignments on the SI Performer. Access to the fader setup is from the fader setup button. Select the fader that you wish to assign or reassign using the select keys. Then, from all of the available options on the screen, choose what you want assigned to that fader. In this case, I'm choosing Stereo 1. And perhaps on the fader next door, I will choose VCA 3. No good reason, but the lights are pretty. And setting up the faders is as simple as that. There's more to fader setup than just assigning a controller to a fader. As you may have noticed, there were shift and insert keys on the fader setup screen. A common scenario is that despite your best planning, someone comes along and you need to add an additional microphone, let's say to the drum kit, an overhead mic. You've already got the console programmed and all the drums are together in a neat group. Your new channel will appear at the end. So How can we fix that with the fader setup? Let's imagine that these are our group of percussion faders that are already set on the desk. And the fader setup, let's use the insert to insert a blank. There's a confirmation dialog that we must say yes, we want to do that. A blank appears and the faders are pushed out to make room. Now, on our blank channel, we want to assign a new mono input to it. We scroll down and we said this was going to be number 33. So we scroll to 33, select it, and now our additional drum mic has been put in the percussion group just where we wanted it. It's easy to get back to the factory defaults for the layer that you're working on if you're unhappy with the setup. Simply press the Reset Layer button in the fader setup page and all faders on the active layer will be reassigned to their factory defaults.